Hi, this is Scott from Heretical Sraffa. This is the third of 5 videos that are associated with the slideshow that we have, introducing viewers to the classical political economy approach of, of economic analysis. And here what we do is we pick up from the previous videos that develop the unassisted labor wild strawberries model. If you recall, the unassisted labor wild strawberries model considered the production process. We're looking at the classical perspective, which of course considers value to be a function of the process of production, the labor theory of value. Here we look at in the wild strawberries model, we have a model of pure unassisted labor in the production of wild strawberries. Laborers go out and pick the wild strawberries. The point here is to eliminate the means of production requirement, and that which provides some clarity to the process of the net relations and looking at the relationship of the living labor added to the produced net output. And we saw that with respect to the wild strawberries model we introduced in the previous lesson. In this video, in this part of the slideshow, what we want to do is we want to continue with the assumption of unassisted labor, but we want to add to it the idea of the gold sector. We want to introduce money. The way in which we introduce money in this model, and this is not the only way to introduce money, I want to be very clear about that this is just one particular approach to the matter. The way we're going to introduce money into this model is by following a particular line of analysis, one of many lines of analysis in the classical theory, specifically regarding an exchange that David Ricardo and Thomas Robert Malthus had in the late 18 teens, 1819 and 1820 through 23, that looked at the notion or posited the idea that gold is going to be the product of unassisted labor. Here, the assumption is going to be that gold is found on the seashore. Again, these are unrealistic assumptions, but what's happening here is that you're having Ricardo and Malthus. It was Malthus who actually first introduced the notion of gold as unassisted labor. But the argument here is to provide a production process for money that doesn't have means of production, because the means of production are ostensibly going to enter into the production of other commodities, and that's really going to convolute the problem of ascertaining an invariable measure of value. One of the things that we're looking at here in this approach to the argument is to consider the question of the numeraire, and the numeraire being the homogeneous measure of value that's going to ascertain the value of all the other commodities in the economy. If, however, the good that's used to measure the value of commodities itself is a means of production in other industries, well, that's going to have a distorting effect on the measure of value, such that when we have changes in distribution and thereby have changes in our prices, we are not sure if the changes are due solely to the conditions of production of the commodity whose good we want to measure, i.e. wild strawberries, or whether the changes come from the measuring commodity itself, i.e. gold. With unassisted labor, what Malthus conjectures, and I think correctly so, is that we don't have to worry about those intermediate changes or those effects of changes in the conditions of production of the numeraire commodity. That's the argument here, and as indicated, we're going to see here that there are several different measures of value that are posited in classical theory. Malthus himself has 5, one of which is going to be gold as a product of unassisted labor. So what we first do is we go to the Ricardo-Malthus exchange. Now here I'm developing the argument out of the works and correspondence of David Ricardo, which are going to be there. It's an 11-volume set. It was edited by Sraffa with the collaboration of Maurice Daub. And here, what Sraffa does is he puts in 11 volumes all the works and and what's really interesting, the correspondence that Ricardo had. And so really what we look at in this particular notion of unassisted gold production really is an argument that took place in the Ricardo-Malthus exchange, and what Malthus and Ricardo had been looking at here. What we have, I clicked on the hyperlink for the Malthus-Ricardo exchange. As indicated, the works and correspondence are 11 volumes. Volumes 6 through 9 are going to be the letters. And so what I have here is the introduction to volume 6. An introduction in volume 6, the introduction introduces readers to all the correspondence. It's the general introduction to the letters for all of the volumes in the letters from 6 to 9. And in that introduction, I encourage readers to go and read that. It's online with the Liberty Fund, Online Library of Liberty has given us this. We're very thankful for that. Here you can see in the introduction to Volume 6, Sraffa has, among other things, a table of concordance of the different correspondence that Ricardo had in his lifetime that are published in the entire works. And it's here. And you can see that the correspondence to Malthus is going to be the most, right? There's 167 letters to and from Malthus. And what we're looking at here are letters mostly from 1823. There's some letters from 1819, 1820, and then 1823. We're looking at these latter year letters that Ricardo and Malthus had. Now remember, Ricardo died in 1823, in September of 1823. And in August of 1823, Ricardo was literally working to his dying days on this question of the invariable measure of value. I encourage people to read Sraffa's general introduction to the works. It's in Works 1, and Sraffa goes through and I think very clearly identifies the question associated with the invariable measure of value. The Works 11 is going to be the general index. The hyperlink is there. It takes you to the hyperlink page, but the Online Library of Liberty does not have the volume 11. Volume 11 was published in 1974, 1975. It was the last thing that Sraffa worked on. The Online Library of Liberty does not have that hyperlink, so you really need to go to the PDF, but they have everything there with wonderful resource. This is the PDF of the Works of Correspondence of Ricardo. And what I want to do is I want to get down here to the entry on the measure of value, okay, which is here. Okay, so this then becomes the entry that Sraffa has in his introduction on value. All right, and so here we have it, and so this is going to be the entry value. And then Sraffa devotes two full pages on the entry on value in his index that refers to all the different places in the works and correspondence with which we can find it. You can see Sraffa's method of exposition here. Remember, the works of correspondence are 11 volumes. This is the 11th volume, so all the references here are going to be for the first 10 volumes. You can see value. The first entry is chapter on value. It's going to be in Works 1, which is the Principles of Political Economy from Ricardo, pages 11 to 51. That's going to be the first chapter, right? And he goes through and he looks at the different different versions of it, etc. I encourage readers to go in there, but I'm just going to go through real quickly some of these entries. Value, chapter on value, value in the early state of society. That's going to be the early and rude state. Adam Smith speaks about in Wealth of Nations, Book 1, Chapter 6, on the component prices of commodities. Smith develops the simple labor theory of value on the early and rude state, and then we'll reject it for the adding up theory of value once we have capitalist commodity production proper. Remember when you're reading Smith, Smith is contradictory. He has different strands of analysis in his tome throughout the entire Wealth of Nations, and we can't blame him. I mean, he's seeing this come on the stage, this capitalism and this market society really come to the fore for the first time. So he's kind of, all over the place. So you can read many things in Smith. So keep that in mind as you're reading Smith. In any event, what we're speaking at here is going to be the idea of the early and rude state that Ricardo talks about. Value regulated by the quantity, not the value of labor. Value is not disturbed by rent. Okay, profits are also part of the value, right? Discussions with Torrens on value. Okay, there's some of the letters you can see here. The letters to other correspondents are going to be for Torrens. All right, and then the Sraffa has the letters on Torrens there. You can also find. And I'm looking for it here. All right, my bad. Okay, we want to come back to this thing, to the journal index here. Okay, my bad here. Okay, we come down. Let me find this journal index. All right, where you have the value here. Okay, this is going to be Torrens. Value and price, early distinction. Value puzzled by the relative law of value. Value sheet anchor on the invariability of the precious metals. Now that's going to be part of what we're talking about here, with the idea of gold as the product, or silver as a product of unassisted labor. Absolute value, exchangeable value. This deals with the last entry that I had referenced before. The last entry, the last paper or treatise that Ricardo was working on late in his life. It's a manuscript that's referred to as absolute and exchangeable value. He was writing it in 1823, in August of 1823, and he would die a few weeks later in early September of 1823. And you could go to Works 4. At the end of Works 4, you can get the manuscript on absolute and exchangeable value, natural value, positive value, proportional value, real and exchangeable value, relative value, value and cost, value and riches, value and utility. This is that utility notion. You can see here that that Ricardo has discussions and correspondence with J.B. Say, right? There again, if you were to go to the index there, you'll see Say is here, and that there's 17 citations that are 17 letters that Ricardo writes to Say. They're in French, so it's for those of us who don't speak French, it's a little bit of an issue. But in any event, it's there. Value in wealth, value in use, definitions of value, difference with Malthus. Now we start to explore some of the material that's relevant for our particular perspective. Okay, simple explanation to Trower, scarcity, relative utility. Then we come here, value, measure, or standard of. This is our point. This is what we're going to be looking at here with the notion of unassisted gold production. Earliest statements. No invariable standard known. Here you can see the idea of the quest for the invariable measure, the search for an invariable standard. Okay, quantity of labor bestowed is the least variable measure. That's what Ricardo's going to be arguing. That's why he uses labor bestowed as the measure of value, because it's going to be the one that's going to be least variable. Median between extremes preferred. Here you get the idea of a just mean, that the invariable measure is going to be a just means. Sraffa is going to come back to this question about the invariable measure as being a just mean, and he uses that with respect to the idea of the watershed proportion between surplus and deficit industries in his in production of commodities in chapter 3. I'll come back to that in a subsequent lecture, but the idea of the median between two extremes is very important. Gold as a just mean. McCulloch's measure is in a quantity of labor estimated by capital employed. Here you have some of the question that of capital. Remember, one of the things that Malthus criticizes Ricardo for with respect to the labor embodied approach is the notion that when a sum of value is, or a magnitude of value is expressed as capital, the very point of it being capital is that it commands more value than its own value, right? And it's going to command more than itself. And what Malthus says is that leads a problem in Ricardo in explaining the origin of profit. Because for Ricardo, if the value is going to be regulated by the labor bestowed, how then do you explain profit, which is seemingly an overplus determined however? Now what Marx comes in and he says that it's going to be an overplus determined by the unpaid labor of workers, but The point is that this is what McCulloch's trying to do. He's trying to reconcile the Ricardian measure. This is after Ricardo died. To relatively little avail. Actually, he was able to kind of cause more contradictions than it's worth. And then we come to Malthus's measure. Okay, Malthus's measure discussed. Okay, and then you can see here that Malthus, Sraffa lists 5 different measures of value in Malthus, and it really encouraged readers to read Malthus and see what Malthus is talking about. So of these 5, Sraffa has labor commanded, a pay of a day's labor. Number 2, number 3, the mean between corn and labor. Number 4, silver or gold picked up in a day on the seashore. That's our measure of value that we're using. The invariable measure of value is going to be the unassisted labor of the production of gold found on the seashore. That's advanced by Malthus. That's the 4th one. And then the 5th one is going to be the constant labor that produces wages and profits in a commodity. Malthus will come in 1823. At the beginning of 1823, Malthus published a manuscript called The Measure of Value Stated and Illustrated. And there, Malthus uses this 5th measure of value as the invariable labor. And he'll speak about that in that manuscript. Ricardo read the measure of value stated and illustrated and wrote notes on that. Sraffa, for whatever reason, left this out of the works and correspondence of Ricardo. That was finally brought to publication by Piero Porta in 1990, who presented Ricardo's notes on Malthus's measure of value, which is there. So that's the relation that we're looking at, the ideas we're looking at with respect to the measure of value. What we're looking at here in our presentation is going to be the idea that gold is going to be the product of unassisted labor. Okay, and so these are just coming back to the manuscript. Hold up here. Coming back to the manuscript here, we see that all of these entries, all of those entries that are here on the 4th notion of invariable measure of value that is advanced by Malthus, those are the ones that are going to be cited here. All right, so all of these are going to be from those citations, and I refer readers to that. I'll begin with the way in which Malthus states it. Malthus states this in his Principles of Political Economy. Remember, Malthus wrote his Principles of Political Economy, published it in 1820. Ricardo publishes Principles of Political Economy, 1st edition, 1817, 2nd edition, 1819. Malthus comes in with his principles in 1820. Ricardo has his 3rd and final edition of the Principles in 1821. In 1820, Malthus identifies the question of the measure of value as follows. Again, looking at the question of gold as a product of unassisted labor. This is Malthus. This is going to be the citation. Beautiful hyperlinks that take us right to there. Thank you very much, Liberty Fund. Okay, so he says here, so says Malthus. I'm going to read from that first paragraph. Let us suppose, thirdly, he talks about other different instances above that people can read. Let us suppose that labor alone, without any advances above the food of a day, were sufficient to obtain the precious metals. That is, that half an ounce of silver and of 1/15 an ounce of gold could always, on average, be found by a day's search on the seashore. There's your unassisted labor. In this case, it is obvious that every commodity which had required in its production any sort of quantity of capital beyond the advances necessary for a day would differ in price from any proportion of gold or silver which had cost the same quantity of labor. The reason is because labor is going to have that gold is going to have unassisted labor, and that it's not going to enter into the means of production of any other commodity. Hence, it's going to be an invariable standard. With regard to the effects of a rise of the price of labor, they cannot be the subject of our consideration, as is evident that no rise in the price of labor could take place on the present supposition. A day's labor must always remain of the same money price, and corn could only rise as far as a diminution in the necessaries of the laborer would allow. Still, however, though the money price of labor could not rise, the rate of profit might fall, and on a fall in the rate of profit, every commodity would fall compared with money. And again, I'll let readers go through and kind of, winnow their way through that and study that on their own. But the argument here that Malthus is making is that if we posit a monetary, a measure of value that is unassisted labor, then the changes in the production are not going to, of other commodities, are not going to affect the measuring standard, okay? That's the argument. And again, we follow that argument here. Ricardo addresses the question. This is going to be an absolute and exchangeable value. Again, this is the last manuscript that Ricardo was working on in his life, 1823, absolute and exchangeable value, a rough draft, and then the manuscript proper. And I'll let people click on and see the way in which Ricardo develops this. All those links are going to be there for people to do. Okay. So we follow Malthus, we follow this relation, we follow this framework. We introduce the gold sector as the product of unassisted labor as a second industry, where the quantity gold is going to be measured in ounces, which we're going to denote X sub G. We make the assumption that 1 ounce of gold is the product of 1 hour of unassisted gold-producing labor. This is the assumption Malthus advanced, being silver picked up on the seashore. The total macro system now consists of the wild strawberry industry as before, also the product of unassisted labor, and the unassisted gold industry as in the physical relations that follow. Wild strawberries, 1 unit of living labor produces 3 units of wild strawberries. Gold, 1 unit of living labor produces 1 ounce of gold. Okay? We're going to write this in terms of the price system in a general numeraire, which is subscripted nu. Looks like the letter V, but it's a Greek letter nu. We have here for our wild strawberries industry. Now you'll see here that the wild strawberries industry, by our equation here, assesses the value of the input, the wage rate times the quantity of labor. It assesses it by the profit factor, where here the profit factor is 1 plus the rate of exploitation, or 1 plus the ratio of distributive shares. Okay, that's going to be the wild strawberry sector, and this is going to be our gold sector. Now you'll notice in our gold sector, we do not attribute it to we do not assess to it a profit factor. There is no 1 plus E there. The superscript 0 on the prices there represent the pure wage regime of distribution. Okay, and that's how we're going to posit the gold, the gold sector. Hence, it's not going to be variable when we change wages. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come to that second equation, and we're going to let gold be the numeraire. So we're going to set the price of gold equal to 1, and then we have the following system of production. I put the gold wage in red just to highlight it, okay, as we move through the PowerPoint so that we can see. So that is the same system. Now we're setting the price of gold equal to 1, and we're going to then solve first for the wage in the gold sector, and then plug that into our wild strawberry unassisted labor sector. It's going to be here. All right, set the price of gold equal to 1. Now we're going to do this when the rate of exploitation is equal to 0. We're also going to develop this first in the pure wage regime of distribution. Okay, so we have the first equation is the wild strawberry sector. The second equation is the unassisted gold sector. Okay, we do it in terms of the numbers, right? Put our numeric example in there. It's going to be this. 1 unit of, and this is only this. I'm here doing the gold sector. 1 unit of labor times the wage rate is going to be equal to 1 ounce of gold. Okay, that gives us a wage rate here of 1 ounce of gold per unit labor. All right, that's going to be the wage that we plug into the wild strawberries equation. Okay, when we plug that into the wild strawberries equation, again, the rate of exploitation is going to be equal to 0. That then gives us the price of wild strawberries expressed in terms of gold as 1 ounce of gold for every 3 units of wild strawberries. So now we have our set of prices, our gold prices. Our gold wage rate is 1 ounce per unit labor. Our gold price of wild strawberries is 1/3 ounce per unit wild strawberries. Okay, this is going to be another set of prices that we can add to the configuration of exchange in the real sector. But before doing so, we had one more step, and that's going to be the idea that we have a fixed exchange rate between gold and currency units, which we denote by the dollar sign. Those are going to be convertible tokens. And so we find that the fixed exchange rate of ounces is going to exchange for a certain quantity of dollars. Okay. We assume a regime of convertible tokens such that each ounce of gold exchanges for $3. Again, the dollar sign behind the number. The ratio of exchange is expressed in the mint price of gold. Here, the mint price of gold. I just make the assumption that the mint price of gold is $3 per ounce to make the prices come out nice, right? Just illustrative in its process. With the assumption of a fixed exchange rate between ounces of gold and units of currency expressed in the mint price of gold, the configuration of exchange is thereby expanded to include two more sets of prices. Okay, so we have our real sector, where you have wild strawberries as a numeraire and labor value as a numeraire, and then we're going to have a monetary sector, where the first money price is going to be the gold price, and the second money price is going to be the currency price, where you're going to convert the gold to currency units based on the fixed exchange rate of the mint price of gold. This then becomes your configuration of exchange. Okay, you have at least 4 different sets of prices for the same 2 commodities, right? Each of these columns represents a set of prices. We reproduce it here. All right, well, we have this here before I move on. You got your unassisted gold is going to be assessed to the mint price, and that gives you your dollar expression. Okay, I reproduced this here. This is going to be the configuration of exchange for the wild strawberry economy. Now we can distinguish the real sector from the monetary sector. The real sector, the first column in the real sector is going to be the wild strawberry as a numeraire. The second column in the real sector is going to be labor as a numeraire. That's your configuration of exchange. Again, the principal diagonal is going to be unity. The off-diagonal elements are going to be reciprocals of one another. We then move to the monetary sector. In the monetary sector, we're going to have unassisted gold is the first set of prices. When we multiply that by the mint price of gold, given the exchange rate, I also refer to that as a monetary expression of gold. We have the dollar currency unit as a numeraire for the monetary sector. We move to the distribution of the net product. We developed the idea of the complete wage rate. The complete wage rate, as we saw, was equal to the net productivity of labor. Again, it's coined in Passanetti's book, page 121. I also utilized this notion in an essay that's being published early next year in the Research in the History of Economic Thought and Methodology. I'll make that available for people as well. But the argument here is that you're going to have the complete wage rate is going to be based on complete remuneration of labor productivity. Changes in distribution of income are defined as reduction in wages from the maximum value of labor's productivity to the minimum value of 0. Okay, I'm going to talk about the idea of the 0 wage rate, but for our purposes here, let's just look at the extremes. Extreme values where the maximum wage is labor productivity and the minimum wage is going to be 0 workers live on air. We'll talk about that, some of the controversy associated with that. But this becomes your changes in distribution, and then you can see how this process is going. So distribution changes, wages decrease from the maximum value equal to labor productivity to the minimum value 0, and that's what we refer to as the 0 minimum wage. So in looking at the distribution, we have to develop 2 conceptual categories. The first is going to be the income share, and the second is going to be the ratio of distributive shares or the rate of exploitation. I've been speaking about these in the previous slides all over, but here we're now going to try to define them in a little bit more detail. Income shares, all you're doing with your income shares is you're looking at the relationship between the wage and the profit revenue out of the value added. So here on your income shares, Y is equal to wage plus profit, W superscript E and Z superscript E. W superscript E is going to be the wage bill at the particular rate of exploitation, and Z superscript E is going to be the profit mass at the particular rate of exploitation. And again, we're going to be changing the rate of exploitation, changing distributive shares. The wage share is equal to wages over value added, remunerated wages over the value of the net product. The profit share is going to be 1 minus the wage share, or profits over the value of the net product, which is going to be there. And the ratio of distributive shares is your rate of exploitation, is E, is just going to be the profit share over the wage share. And then here you can see I have all three of our variables expressed in terms of the values that are associated with the different regimes of distribution. We have a pure wage regime of distribution, we have a zero wage regime of distribution, and we have the intermediate case in between. For the wage share, it's the first inequality here. At the pure wage remuneration, the wage share is equal to 1. At the zero wage remuneration, the wage share is equal to 0. In the intermediate cases, the wage share is equal between 1 and 0, is equal to a positive fraction. For the profit share, it's going to be the opposite because they're going to be inverse of each other. At pure wage remuneration, the profit share is equal to 0. At pure profit remuneration or zero wage remuneration, as I said it here, the profit share is going to be equal to 1. And the profit share is going to be a number between 0 and 1 as we change distribution. You'll notice you have offsetting inequalities with respect to the wage and the profit share, and that shows the inverse relationship associated with the two. And then here we have the ratio of distributive shares, or the rate of exploitation, which in the pure wage remuneration is going to be 0, and then in the pure profit or zero wage remuneration is going to be infinite. So the rate of exploitation is infinite. Okay. Now, and then of course it's going to be the intermediate case is going to have values of the ratio of distributive shares between them. So here we're going to be looking at our economy. So here we're going to be considering the value added in our economy and relate that to the value of the net output. Okay, we saw that 1 unit, and this is going to be the wild strawberries industry, right? So the labor input of the wild strawberries industry, 1 unit of labor is going to produce 3 units of wild strawberry. We saw that this was a congruency relationship based on the physical structure of production, that 1 unit of labor is congruent to 3 units of wild strawberry. Live-in labor is congruent to the physical net output. And then when we have the prices of the commodity so determined, the value of living labor is equal to the value of the net output. There's your net normalization, paragraph 10 equal paragraph 12 that we see in Sraffa. This then becomes the distribution of the net product, okay? So we begin here with the zero profit regime, or the unitary wage share regime, where wages are going to be equal to value added. The value of living labor is equal to the value of the net output. I set them both equal to Y. That's going to be your value added. And then what we're seeing here is a distribution of the value added from the pure wage regime to the pure profit regime. And you can see basically what's happening is we take our pie and then we're going to divide portions of the pie between wages and profit. Now, what determines that distribution, what the particular distribution, that's the $100,000 question that we're not going to look at here. All we're saying is that this distribution can happen, and when it does, we have these relations here. Okay, so then I come back and I apply some of these relations to our wild strawberry industry. Again, we're not, the only reason we posit the gold producing industry is to set money value. So once we set our numeraire and our money value, we're going to use that. We're not going to worry about the gold industry anymore in terms of the distributive relations, but we will apply that to our wild strawberries industry. And so you can see here, this table shows the wild strawberries industry associated with different regimes of distribution. The first column has your wage share. It goes from a wage share of unity, which is pure wage remuneration, all the way down to a wage share of 0, which is going to be zero wage remuneration or pure profit remuneration. This is going to be your value added. This is going to be the wage rate. This is going to be the wage share. The wage bill. Okay, so this says the complete wage rate. So this says here the wage bill when the wage share is equal to 1 is equal to the value added, and it goes all the way down here to the point where when you're at a zero wage share, workers live on air. Profits are going to be the opposite. Okay, are going to have the opposite relation there, and then your rate of exploitation is going to move accordingly. I can let readers go through and see that that relationship there. And so what we do is we take our extraction schedule, right, that we're going to now draw in quadrant 2. We looked at this in an earlier video, but this vertical axis is going to represent values of the wage. The horizontal axis is going to be positive values of the rate of exploitation or the extraction relation or the ratio of distributive shares. And then you can see that as the wage share falls, wages fall to 0 and the rate of exploitation increases to infinity. And then this gives us the price equation for the wild strawberry industry when we have those changes in our distribution. And you'll notice here that in this case, we're setting the wild strawberry price equal to $1 per unit. And we're varying the wage rate, and we're also varying the rate of exploitation. And those represent our changes in distribution. That's going to be this concludes the section on the PowerPoint that looks at the unassisted labor production model, the wild strawberries and the gold sector production model. What we're going to do in the next lesson is we're going to develop the one commodity corn economy where labor is now assisted by corn. And you're going to have corn as seed is going to be your means of production. Okay? Right on. We'll see you online. All right? Take care. Ciao.